Yes, so the first item, I sent a merge request and pinged you, Christopher, and Mac to see what you think about the proposal. I didn't continue working on it until I get your opinion, whether this is the place or not. Like, I didn't know where else to put it. I thought that this was a good location. So once I get feedback from you and from Mac, I'll continue merging it or moving it somewhere. Depends on that.
Yeah, so apologies, Maren. You sent me a Slack on it, and I meant to get back to it, and I never did. So I will get back to it today.
Yeah, not a problem. It's not going to be a make or break situation for us immediately, so it's okay.
Maren, I was just wondering, like I just read through the change there, and I just, from the notes from last week, it seemed like you wanted to drive a pretty major is probably not the right word, but significant change in the way that we're developing, towards Kubernetes support. It just, as I read through that, it didn't seem like it was kind of direct, or aggressive is not the right word, but it just didn't seem like direct enough to drive that change. I don't know.
It was not sending the message that we were discussing, right? Like, that's what you're saying. Okay. So the reason for this is I was considering the location where I placed this. So depending on whether this is the place we want to have it or not, like, I have to have the language that fits the rest of the explanation, right? Like, if we are going down the handbook route, then I can have a different type of language, but then I need to figure out how to connect that with our regular processes as well. That is mostly the reason, and that's why I stopped there and not improved things further until I get feedback from Mac and Christopher to see whether this is even the way we want to drive this message forward, because we don't have a good medium for this right now for these type of things. And the documentation that is written in there is shipped with our product, and our community contributors are also using it. So it makes it a bit harder to drive the type of message we exactly wanted to drive.
Okay.
At least
that clears that
from
up.
my
Yeah,
view.
thank you. Yeah.
Well, all right, the next item is GitLab pages sync. In short, there are two proposals right now. One is suggested by Camille on using zip, and the other one is a different approach, which is using more or less existing systems that we have, and a bit more of a not a complicated route, but a different route to what the zip proposal is suggesting. So basically, the decision was made that the engineering manager of release team ends up deciding based on the input from engineering which direction we want to take. Christopher, you want to speak up? You have also an item.
Yeah, just more. I know that last week there was a little bit of confusion around kind of the reasoning behind why the zip architecture was chosen. So there's one particular comment that kind of summarizes it there, minus the it's already done, because it's not done, obviously. Just wanted to point that out in case anybody had any questions.
Great, thanks for that. So I'll just add one other thing, that I think the timeline is what will, in my opinion, win here. Like, whichever one is less complex and gives us that shorter timeline is probably what's going to be chosen, but let's see. Both of them are not as straightforward as I expected, or hoped for, rather. I kind of hoped code will magically appear out of thin air and resolve the problem, but unfortunately it doesn't work like that.
Yeah, anytime you're moving storage, it's never simple or trivial. Period.
Exactly.
Like, just throw that assumption out of the way.
Especially with the as public facing service as pages, right? Like, we have our documentation written in it. We have like a bunch of other things that are being served. So we kind of need to be careful there. Jerry, you want to speak up?
Yeah, I was just wondering about any ideas. So I think we have a pretty good idea of what the implementation will look like. but as is always the case, is the migration of whatever is there already. That's going to be a painful thing. Is this something that we are thinking that the application will magically do? You know, when somebody requests something, then the thing gets moved or whatever? Or is it an expectation that infra folks are going to be driving this on some sort of long-term effort to manually or semi-automatedly move stuff?
So that is the main difference between these two approaches. One is suggesting, like, once we've written the code, things will just work without a lot of interaction from the operators. But the other one is suggesting more of a semi-automated process where things will work transparently both ways, and there will be a migration path that someone will have to make a decision to do. So that is the fundamental, I think, when it comes to process, fundamental difference between the two.
Okay. Do you have any idea when we'll make a decision? The reason I ask is because, I mean, as these migrations tend to do, they will significantly impact infra, and that's going to affect whatever deliverables, Steve has in mind for Q3.
So the DRI of this will probably answer better. I know from my side that I authorized Jakob to spend at most this week in fleshing out the POC. Decision should be made soon.
Okay.
When I say soon, probably this week or next week. I don't exactly know.
All right.
Nicole
no worries. I'll keep an eye on it just because, just want to make sure we don't get slammed with unexpected work like this, because these things, they just tend to drag the life out of infra folks at times. So.
Yeah, I think it's a key input is what the migration strategy is and what's the pain associated with it. So I think that's part of the inputs we need. I'm not quite as optimistic as Marin is to make a decision. I think we're probably a couple weeks out, but I think that's why we need the additional feedback on the migration strategy.
Okay. Well, I'm glad that you're the pessimistic one this time around.
Optimistic pessimist.
Progress.
Yeah, just the thing here is, from my view, we'll have to pay the price somewhere. So it's either going to be like a way, probably a more complex development strategy, or it's going to be a simpler development strategy with a bit of, or some involvement of people operating the instance. So it'll have to be a trade-off in the end.
What I'm trying to get at is not that one choice is better than the other, just so that we know as soon as possible on the infra side to be ready for it and carve out cycles if we need to. So in some ways, I'm in favor of something simpler in the software because it gets us there faster, and then do some finite manual work, right? This is not a forever thing. We just need to get it done and move on. But that will have an effect on folks on call and all that. So just so that it's not something that suddenly comes from left field. It's like, oh, it turns out we have all these migrations to do. So I'll keep an eye on it, and Steve's part of the work is in the working group, so he has awareness as well. Yes, let's record that Christopher was the less optimist in the notes. All right, Mary, you have the next one. CI jobs.
Sorry, Christopher. This is like a very unique opportunity for me to be more optimistic. All right, next item, CI job logs. Not much progress last week, or apart from the code has been merged. I spoke with Grzegorz, and he's expecting to do a phased rollout this week to see the first impact of how does this code actually behave. So a lot of progress there, or good progress, I think, there.
All right, we're going to ignore the 4th item because it was a dumb question from me that had already been answered in the very first item. So what's happening next? I will continue to track NFS work, which actually leads perfectly into my first item for discussion, which is I've been looking at, there were questions last week, and I have been thinking about how do we track this work in a more cohesive way versus just the notes. For now, all of the work is in development, so it's easy enough to create a board to populate this. But as we've discussed, there will be some work that will land in infrastructure. And unless I'm mistaken, there is no way for me to use a single label and put stuff in a single board that actually spans these two groups in that hierarchy. I see Marin saying, no, it's not possible. So
not possible.
I think I would create the same tag on both hierarchies, and then we'll have two boards, and then we'll just have to sort of squint our eyes to put both of them together. Because the only issue there is perhaps keeping track of dependencies, but we can still do that. I think the work is self-contained enough that it won't be a major undertaking. So I will do that. I will create the labels and the boards and then track that way. And then the second item I have for discussion is that there's been some conversations inside Infra about the move of stateful stuff to Kubernetes. I thought that was way up in the future, so I wasn't worrying about it too much. But I know there are some internal conversations about it. My own sense right now is that this should not be a high priority item. Like, there's a ton of work we can do without worrying about this, and there's a significant amount of work on the data stores team right now as it is to add any Kubernetes related stuff right now. So in some ways, this is a question for you, Steve, whether you agree with this line of thinking right now.
I mean, I'd say that the thing that I agree with is making sure that we're like iterating forward in manageable steps that allow us to get things done. And I think kind of a little bit of undertone I'm hearing there is that there's enough for us to do with the stateless services still ahead of us, that if we remain focused on those, we'll be able to actually get that done before we move on to attacking stateful services and moving in there. So if I've characterized that correctly, I'd certainly be supportive of saying, let's continue to focus on stateless services for now.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I just wanted that clarification. The storage, Gitly, Redis, I think it's also part of that equation.
Okay, so it's all standard services. It's not...
Redis is a bit more arguable in my opinion, but I can put Redis there if you want.
It's all standard services. It's not something that we need like a specific development change on, or at least we haven't recognized development change at this point.
No, it's just the one area where Kubernetes is not the thing that you would use for stateful services. And so it's been done, and we know of some products that do this. This is really a question about priorities, of something that I can just walk into a meeting and say, look, yes, we know it's in there. It's probably going to be sometime in the future. We have other work to focus on right now. Let's just focus on that, given all the stuff that needs to happen on stateless. Like I just don't want to invest cycles right now on stateful, given all the work that we need to do on database and all that right this minute. So,
gotcha. Yeah, I imagine, Marin, it's a good point about Redis. So I guess it depends on, and this is where certainly rely on the rest of you and your knowledge of this, of like specifically how, the use case that we have within GitLab for Redis, as to whether or not within GitLab where we're really using it in a stateful or a stateless service fashion. Because you could argue either way depending on what the use case is there, and I think we should just be clear on which bucket it falls into.
Yeah, I think because it's split between, like, we have different types of services that we use Redis for. So one is almost like a second database for us, because if it degrades and if it goes out, it will take us a longer time to rebuild. Like, we would be really slow. We will be operational, but really slow. But we have the other two sides of Redis that we are using that even if it goes out, we can recover fairly quickly. So that part, like, even if it's in Kubernetes and not highly available, that's another point. We would be able to operate it, I believe. But the question here is, do we want to splinter our energy right now when we know that we have quite a lot more from the application side to go and talk about this? I would argue no, at least not in the next 3 months, right. Maybe in the next 6 months. But when it comes to the database and GitLab repository storages, I think we are even like between 6 to 12 months out of actually like fully focusing on it. My view, at least.
I agree with that view. And I think also these are not the types of nodes that we're scaling up and down constantly, right? So the need for those to be in Kubernetes is less pressing than the rest of the stack. So again, it was just a prioritization question because I've been part of I've been in a couple of conversations where folks were asking about this, and my leaning was towards, let's not worry about that this minute. There is plenty of work to do on the rest of the stack to get this done. So cool.
Yeah, also keep in mind that the ecosystem is also developing, right? Like we shouldn't be on the forefront of these things ourselves, in my opinion, right? We could wait it out because we do have the luxury of, well, we have more work to do anyway. So yeah.
Yeah, agreed. Cool. And then unless there are any other items for discussion, the one follow-up item that I'm going to chase this week is to see if on all the other deliverables that we have for the working group, if there is anything else that we can bump up in priority. Because right now we're super focused on NFS, and we know that's a huge blocker, but there's probably progress we can make in other areas. So I'll flesh those out and then bring those back to this group next week. And then we can make some decisions on, yes, we could parallelize, but we're busy anyway this quarter. So we'll leave it for Q4 or whatever. But at least we expose those and we understand where we can, if cycles become available, where we can invest them. So.
Jerry, I had one question for this group that I didn't write up here. Do we have the right audience in this group? Do we need to find someone else who needs to participate to help us out?
I feel in general we're making the right progress, and given that this is going to be a long-term working group, this audience will probably change over time slightly depending on what we're focusing on. Is there anyone in particular you have in mind? Any area?
Well, I see that Andrew is here as a representative of product right now, so I think we are covered on that side. I just thought maybe it would be interesting to see the areas we are covering right now, who the exact product manager is, because that affects prioritization process significantly. So we could like have Andrew and the product manager help us out there. That's mostly what I was aiming at.
I'd recommend coordinating with Andrew pre-meeting and getting them to show up for the specific ones you need them engaged in. Unless it's like, that they're going to be engaged for, weeks on end. Pulling in product managers generically is not a recipe for success in my book.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I think if we have like a specific ask for them, I'm happy to coordinate before the meeting, and maybe we could bring them in on an ad hoc basis if we need to.
Sounds good.
Speaking of the output of the deliverable, do we anticipate any of the findings here to affect the reference architectures? Or is there anything we need to take in and account for that there?
Well, right now, NFS, right? Like as soon as we remove NFS, that should affect it, right? Like, are we still actually recommending NFS now that I'm saying it and I'm not really sure?
I think it's only for pages.
That's correct.
Right.
And while we will get it off of .com quickly, we can't necessarily force customers, right? So like depending on where they are in their life cycle, particularly if they made a huge investment in NFS storage, us asking them to migrate may not be the right decision at that point.
So does that mean that the product will support sort of both configuration options?
For a period of time, right?
Okay.
Like you can't, like...
I think that's fair enough. Like,
yeah, it could be 3 months, could be 3 years. That's the part I can't really give you better visibility to. So that's something probably Andrew, you and I, and maybe Josh should talk about offline. Is like, if we have a specific transition strategy here, what does it consist of? Is it a year? Is it, and from that perspective.
Yeah.
I mean, we can dive into specifics later, but our strategy is we can't really force them off what they are. But the next opportunity, whether somebody sets up a new architecture, we will slide it in there then, but we can't yank them off.
Yeah. Recommendation for new customers, absolutely. That's
Yep.
one thing. It's just more of, like
Yep.
one of our
Well, if
biggest
nothing
customers
else,
just made a big investment in NFS.
I think for the reference architectures, we will find out if with the changes to, with the removal of NFS, if the non-NFS option has any performance implications for the rest of the stack that is contained in the reference architecture, we may end up tweaking them, but I honestly don't expect that to be the case because the bulk of the app is still not, like, that's not pages, right? Let me rephrase that. I assume we're going to run the reference architectures without NFS to see what their baseline performance is and whether the numbers that we've determined are the steps in the configuration make sense. And unless we see any major deviations, like plus minus 10% of performance, then I would probably leave them as they are and not worry about it too much. The only other area where I think there may be some influence to them is as we work out the transitions from, the one reference architecture to the next step up, we may find that we may need to do some tweaks to them because we can find a way to transition from one to the next online. And so we may go back and say, well, if we do this third thing and change the reference architectures to use this, then that transition can be a slam dunk versus, oh, we do need that downtime. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the prep work so it's compatible with the next one when you upgrade.
So we know what the reference architectures look like. I don't think we've ever done, and one of the outputs from this working group is figuring out how do you transition from one to the next without impacting customer, the uptime of the instance. And so we don't know yet, but it's still, I don't think the changes would be so significant that we need to significantly change what they look like. Like I expect maybe a couple of handbook updates, but nothing super major.
Cool. Yeah, the only thing I ask is let's notify the team because the folks working on the reference architecture are all on this call, the Nelia, Tanya, and then Jason. So I'm asking, like, we know NFS and now, but like if there are other, next candidates, then please loop us in early so we can account for it and test for it. That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, I mean, we'll definitely highlight it here. So it won't be a surprise. Cool. It'll definitely one of the main topics for discussion here. And I think all the stakeholders that are interested in those reference architectures are here. But I can definitely make sure to keep you all in the loop, even if it's out of band, if we run into something specific.
Mike, how do you keep track of changes in the application and how the service is behaving right now outside of this working group?
We moved so we used to have the self-managed scalability working group. That has moved to a synchronous board update and a bi-weekly triage. So we're tracking the work stream there instead and collaborating with the day-to-day operations of the distribution team. Is that you're asking on the process or you're asking on the technicalities of testing
both
stateless?
Yeah, both, because the things that are coming down the pipeline right now are registry is going to have a dependency on a database. Prefect already has a dependency on the database. All of those things affect the reference architectures, well, GitLab.com significantly, obviously. But I can see it also coming down the reference architecture route as well. And in the conversations, I didn't really necessarily see where that fits with what your team is doing.
We're testing mostly scale, but if there's data integrity and like lost cache invalidation, stateless things, then we should discuss it and make sure we test it. I don't know. I'm not close to ground, so maybe either Tanya or Nelia can help chime in there if we're doing anything there.
I'll make an effort to be the bridge between those two worlds so that people don't have to we don't have to have 10 people chasing something. Since I'm the DRI in the working group, I'll take on that and I'll make sure that data gets to where it needs to go. Does that work, Mary? Awesome.
Thank you.
Maren, yeah. It sounds like what you're asking for might be an issue that says we are testing it, or we have tested it and here are the results, and having that linked to the main work issue. Would that get you the information that you're seeking here to make you feel like quality's on top of it?
Sure, it's more. Yeah, I guess that is the best summary there. Yeah.
We'll make issues where we don't have them.
Cool. All right, no blockers this week. So thank you, everyone. See you next week.